let's get into some buys for contending teams. Who
Okay.
you got, Hammer, as your first guy up here?
I'm going to preface these two guys by saying these three notes that I have written down here. The first one is you only want to buy these guys if you're a contending team. And what I mean by contending team, if you're in a 12 team league, that's pretty standard, right? You want to be somewhere in the top 4 if you're going to go ahead and make a move like this. Another one of my keys is the guys that I'm going to mention should not be counted on to be your wide receiver 1 every single week. And that's something I talked about too when we do some of the roster reviews, especially if you have an older guy. You want them to kind of slot in as your wide receiver 2 at best, right? And then my third key to preface my guys are you should have a young stud wide receiver kind of already in place before you make a move. First guy I have is a really interesting guy, a guy I've watched for a long ass time. Used to play in Green Bay, currently plays in Vegas. That is Davante Adams. And I know Davante Adams is in a really weird situation, right? Because he's still really, really good. And if you go look at the final tally of his numbers, he was still extremely productive. He had 103 receptions for 1,144 yards and 8 touchdowns. That put him at wide receiver 10 in full PPR. And that's considered a down year for Davante Adams. Now, I know they had a lot of upheaval in that organization at the quarterback, at the head coach spots. Going into next year, there's still some uncertainty. We don't know who their quarterback is going to be. Is it going to be Aiden O'Connell? Is it going to be Jimmy G? I really don't know. And their head coach, right? They went 5-4 down the stretch quietly. The Las Vegas Raiders went 5-4 down the stretch with Antonio Pierce as their head coach. And if you look at Davante Adams' statistics over the last 4 to 5 games, he was really good and he was really, really productive. So over his last 4 games, he had 10 targets, 12 targets, 6 targets, 21 targets in week 17. And that would have been your fantasy championship game. 21 targets, 13 receptions, buck 26, and 2 touchdowns. So if you rode with Davante Adams into your championship week, he paid big dividends. I think Davante Adams' stock has kind of taken a bit of a hit because of all the things I previously mentioned. And I think he could be a good value. Now, there's going to be some inconsistency with his production on a week-to-week basis because of the quarterback play, because of all that stuff. So I think if Davante Adams slots in as your wide receiver 2 on your team, he has wide receiver 1 potential still in him. As evidenced by this season, he finished at wide receiver 10 in full PPR. So I think Davante could be a really good value. And he's 31 years old. So maybe somebody is looking to move off of him. And if you're able to cash in, he might be on the New York Jets next season catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. So that's also something I didn't write down in my notes, but I was just kind of thinking about. So I think Davante Adams could be a pretty solid value.
I mean, I like Davante. Like you said, his value has taken a hit. Again, he's what, 31 years old? Is he going to be 32 going into next season? I mean, so definitely up there in age. That age cliff is a real thing and it is going to hit. And when it does, it's going to hit hard. But I mean, the last 4 seasons, he's had 100 or more catches the last 4 seasons. The last 5 out of 6 over 100 catches. So like you said, still finish winding up at wide receiver 10. I can expect, like, at worst, maybe a wide receiver 15,
12.
like, next season. So, yeah, he does make it worth it, and he shouldn't cost you that much. I mean, on Keep Trade Cut, he's wide receiver 28. I
There you
mean,
go.
75 overall. He's around guys like Josh Jacobs, Javante, Cooper Kupp, Joku, DeAndre Swift. For sure. Give me Davante out of almost all of those guys there. I mean,
He's
you can make
still
an argument maybe for Jacobs, but
Devontae is still a needle mover, like on a per week basis. He can still move the needle. Like week
Mhm.
3, he had 13 catches on 20 targets for 172 and 2 touchdowns. And then he had that monster game I talked about in week 17, against Indianapolis. Like I said, I don't think Davante Adams is going to be the Davante Adams from Green Bay anymore, or even the Davante Adams from last year, because last year he was amazing with Derek Carr. Now, what if the Raiders get a quarterback of note? What if Russell Wilson goes to Vegas?
Yep.
Feel better about
But
Devontae?
he's a guy that you want to be looking for if you're trying to contend, that you can get for not necessarily a hefty price tag, especially now going into the offseason. He's an older player, so the value's down at that point. He's a guy that almost is about to fall off the cliff at this particular age. People don't like messing with that. And, we're going into the offseason here now where all of these older players, all of their value is decreasing. Nobody wants these guys right now. It's not till they're putting up points that people want these older players. So in
A
the
la Mike
offseason,
Evans.
not a lot of people are going to be wanting Davante Adams. Can you get him for a late first, early second? Can you get him for 2 seconds? Will you throw a 110, 111, 112 at him?
He's a physical receiver. That's one thing that does concern me a little bit, but he takes care of his body. He's always out there. Even when he's getting banged up, he still seems like he powers through. I've seen him get kind of nicked up in a couple of games and he comes back into the game. There was one game in particular that it looked like he had taken a hit, and I think it was a nationally televised game, if I'm not mistaken. He took a hit and I'm like, oh no, Davante's out for the rest of the game. Comes back in the second half, plays pretty well, if I'm not mistaken. So Davante's a really good, solid wide receiver too, on your team if you're a contender, right? If you have CD, if you have Amon Ra, you slot Davante in as your wide receiver too, you feel pretty good about it.
You think Adams is a Jet in 2024?
I do
I
think
don't
it's
know.
possible. The Jets currently hold the 10th overall pick. Vegas holds the 13th overall pick. I think the Jets do need to address their offensive line in this particular draft. So it'll be tough. And also too, remember Aaron Rodgers' cap hit is coming due. So they're gonna have to do some things with the cap to try and fit Devontae Adams in there. But anything's possible, man. I've seen crazier things happen.
Our first buy for contenders is going to be a guy that a lot of people just don't like right now, has let a lot of people down in the second
I think
half
I
of the
know who
season,
I
a
think I
guy
know where
that's
you're
getting
going.
a little bit older,
I know where you're
but
going.
there is nobody else on that squad. He has finished wide receiver 3, 7, 4, and 9 in the past 4 years, and
I
that
know
is
exactly who
Stephon
this is.
Diggs of
Yep.
the Buffalo Bills.
Yep.
Could probably get him for a late first at this point. I'm fine with spending. He's a guy that a lot of people are gonna be coming off of. I mean, look at his second half of the season. It's been absolute
Dreadful.
trash. I mean, in the last actually few games, I mean, 65% of snaps, 60% of snaps, 46% of snaps. So
That's alarming.
whether that is due to injury or whatever the case was, I'm okay with taking a discount on it because we know what type of player Stephon Diggs is. We know what type of route runner he is, and he's still winning on routes. Like he's still getting separation. It's not like he's not being able to win on routes or he's losing a step there. He is one of those guys that might be able to last a little bit longer because of his route running. Right. It's not all relied on just the speed that he has. He's one of those route running technicians. I mean, still sixth in targets, ninth in target share. I mean, 11th in air yards, 17th in yards after catch. Like he's still producing. It just hasn't been there for some reason for the last whatever few games there was. And I know there was a couple games in there where Josh Allen like barely threw the football. There was 3 games where he threw 15 times, 21 times, and then 30 times. So 7 completions, 15 and 15. So there just wasn't a lot going around in those particular games, which is way lower than kind of what he's been throwing all season. So there is a little bit to it. So I'm definitely going after some Stephon Diggs. And there's a lot of talk of like that he's frustrated, like okay, maybe he
I
gets
was gonna bring that
traded.
up.
So there's a lot of things kind of to look at where he's a guy where there is some kind of controversy around, but I'm willing to go out there and take him right now for the discount before he starts putting up points and you can't get him next season.
I will say this. Listen, Stephon Diggs is a fantastic receiver. I don't think there's any denying that. Just look at his statistics, look at the impact he had on Josh Allen since he's been in Buffalo. There's no coincidence that when Stephon Diggs arrived, just Josh Allen became a top 5 quarterback. There's no getting around that. However, he does have these diva tendencies. Like when Devontae Adams gets frustrated on the sideline, it looks a lot different and it feels a lot different than when Stephon Diggs gets frustrated on the sideline for whatever reason. Maybe because they're playing in more important games than the Raiders in the playoffs the last couple of years and they haven't been able to come through, but it just feels different. You know what I mean? And all the controversy that surrounds him. I don't disagree with you that he is a good buy because he's the older receiver, still productive. Something doesn't feel right. And it started last season. And we thought as long as they were winning, because remember, at the beginning of the season, they were kind of like a little Jekyll and Hyde-ish. And then they picked it up. Stephon Diggs was kind of going nuts there for a little while. And then the wheels just fell off for whatever reason. And what's interesting about the Buffalo situation is that they won a bunch of those games right? They won their last 4 or 5 in a row. And Stephon Diggs wasn't very productive.
He missed that one tutty they should have had.
Right. Yes.
Josh
Against
overthrew
Miami.
him. Yeah.
Against Miami. You know, their winning streak towards the end of the season, Stephon Diggs wasn't a big part of that. And the alarming thing to your point is week 14, he played 79% of the snaps. 15, 16, and 17, he played 46, 60, and 65. And they needed to win all those games, right? Because they needed to win that division, right? They were going for the division. They weren't locked into a playoff spot by any means. Yeah, it's a little concerning to me. I still think he'll be productive, but there are some weird feelings or weird vibes with Stephon Diggs, in my opinion.
I mean, he went back up to 88% snaps on against Miami when that was, a game that matters. And then
For all the marbles.
there were those other games where they didn't throw the ball a lot, so that had to do
Mhm.
with probably his snap percentage at that point. They did change the offensive coordinator as well.
They did.
So, it's not something I'm particularly worried about. And then, like I just said, last game he could have had that huge tutty, which would have changed. I mean, he would have had what, a buck 50,
Mhm.
buck 60, like, so, that would have changed a lot as well. But yeah, I'm still rolling with my boy Diggs. Like I said, late first, maybe a second and a piece, maybe that you can get him for. And he's a guy that, he's probably got a few years left. Like, he is 30, so he is getting up there. But again, he is one of those route running guys that I'm willing to, pay a late first for if I'm one of those top teams. I don't have to rely on him as my number one guy, like you said, which is a really, important point. Because if you are relying on him as your number one guy, that means that you probably shouldn't be buying him, and you're probably not like one of those real contenders.
That's right.
And
It's
yes,
right
Stephon
on the
Diggs
money.
used to pout like crazy. I mean, I know that as being a Vikings fan, but this year, and I had mentioned it earlier in the season, something changed with Diggs. He wasn't being a bitch this year and crying all over. He was actually different. There was actually footage of him going over to Josh Allen talking about like, "Come on, we need you." So I saw him change a little bit this year. And did that have to do with everybody kind of getting on him of what we saw in the past, which was I was a person that was getting on him for that as well. So does that make, did that make him actually change and be more of a team player and be kind of different? Or is it all just, kind of bullshit? So I'll let you guys determine that, but
I think
I'll
it's
take
somewhere in
I'll take Diggs.
between. I think he was just more cognizant of how public his reactions are on the sidelines. So, listen, I think Diggs is obviously still going to be super productive, but it just something just doesn't like feel right. Even on that missed bomb that you were talking about, right? That doesn't usually happen when they're on the same page and they're rolling and they got their shit together. So it's just it's weird, man. There's some weird vibe going at,
Let
and it all started in that playoff game.
My only thing is like they're not traded. There's nothing that can happen. Like he's there.
I
He's not
feel
going
that.
anywhere. He's not going anywhere. I don't think he's going anywhere. Is it possible? Yeah, but I don't think he's that dumb. I think that he realizes, especially after being, like in Minnesota, and he sees, other good wide receivers around the league, like he's got a top quarterback. He's got a guy that can get him the ball. He's got a guy that can make him a top 10 wide receiver. Like, don't be dumb. And if he does go somewhere else, you would have to hope that obviously it's a good QB situation, which if he is going to move somewhere else, you would think that would be the case. So I just don't really see him going anywhere, really.
Yeah, I don't either. I know there were some like very, very low rumblings of his status within the organization, but realistically, if you have Josh Allen, like there's still a window for the Buffalo Bills, right? Like the AFC is not this juggernaut that we thought it was going to be. There's some good teams. I think the Ravens have kind of separated themselves, but after that, right? Do you feel good? We could pick apart any of these teams outside of the Ravens, really, and even the Ravens, right? Lamar's health is always a concern anytime he takes off and runs, or something like that. So I think the AFC is still wide open, and I think the Buffalo Bills have a legit shot. And I talked about them earlier as one of my dark horses to go out and get to the Super Bowl because the expectation isn't what it was the last 2 years. So I think there's still a window, and I think Stephon Diggs has to be a big part of that if they're going to get to
So
that Super Bowl.
I think he stays, and I think that, being that there's all these questions and conversations that makes him number one more available and number two cheaper. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
you
I agree.
know,
from that standpoint for sure.
Especially once we get up to the draft where even some of these late picks now, people are gonna start liking those picks. People are gonna start wanting them. So, let's get into another guy, Hammer. Who else you got for us?
That is my man from the Los Angeles Rams, number 10, Cooper Kupp. The value has to be there. There's obviously all the caveats I talked about. You shouldn't count on Cooper Kupp as your wide receiver one anymore. I think those days are over. But some interesting things. Number one, he is an older receiver that a team may not value anymore, right? Because of the inconsistencies, because of his injury history starting to creep up. And I talked about Cooper Kupp in terms of that triple crown season he had a couple of years ago. That has started to take its toll. But on the flip side, they just drafted a guy named Puka Nakua, who has seemingly been able to take some of the wear and tear and the load off of Cooper Kupp, where he doesn't need 20 targets a game. So I think that's a little bit of a factor in maybe prolonging Kupp's, productivity, not as a wide receiver one anymore, but maybe as a wide receiver two-ish now. And I think that's okay, right? Like you have to go in with that expectation that Cooper Kupp is a wide receiver two now. You can't treat him like a wide receiver one anymore. The Matthew Stafford bounce back. That's another factor in why I say Cooper Kupp, because Matthew Stafford seemingly has been able to bounce back. That team bounced back in a big way. Kyron Williams was big, right? That offense kind of really came together. And they were in a point in their season where it looked like the wheels were kind of a little shaky and they got their shit together, and the Rams are in the playoffs. I don't think many teams had the Rams in the playoffs this year. So the Matthew Stafford bounce back was really solid. And if you remember early in the season, Matthew Stafford wasn't really throwing for a bunch of touchdowns. Like something
Oh,
felt like he was trying to get himself back together. And if you look at Matthew Stafford's last month, he's been on fire. He's been playing some of the best quarterback of anybody in the NFL over the last month and change to get that team into the Super Bowl. So another one is he can still produce wide receiver one weeks. He played 12 games this year. He finished as a wide receiver one 4 times. He can still move the needle, right? He had week 6, 7 catches on 9 targets. His first game back, he had 8 catches on 12 targets for 118. Second game back, 7 catches on 9 targets for 148 and a touchdown. And that's with Puka on the field, by the way. Then I think there was a little bit of an injury thing going on with him, because there was a month and change where the production was just terrible. But if you look at his last month, he's been that guy again. 98, 97, 100, 100, 98% of snaps. 8 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, 12 targets, 4 touchdowns in his last 5 games, over 100 yards twice. So for Cooper Kupp, you can't, like I said, can't rely on him as wide receiver one. But if you slot him in as your wide receiver two, maybe even wide receiver three, if you got some other good pieces, your wide receiver 2A, I'd feel comfortable with that. So
mhm,
I think Cooper Kupp could be a bit of a value. And listen, his value may have taken a little bit of a hit because Puka Nakua is so productive. So that value may be there, where if you go out and same thing with all these other guys we talked about, a late first or at least 2 seconds. I do have a little bit more worry about Cooper Kupp in terms of injury history.
sure.
So he is a
Mhm,
little bit more of a risk, but he can still
sure.
carry wide receiver one weeks out there.
Mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you got Stafford, you still got McVay coming back. I mean, we know what Cup can do. I think the main thing about Cup is he gonna stay healthy? I think we're at a point in his career here where it's gonna be a few games unhealthy, a few games healthy, like, and that's when we see him, play really well when he's healthy. Otherwise, like, Puka is the one that's getting the work. Stafford now, I think Stafford started to understand that I don't have to force feed Cooper Kupp. There's some other guys
Mm-hmm.
that I can get the ball to. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to play like how we did that season. I can spread it around. We got Puka, we got, Robinson that's playing well. Kyron's been awesome in the run game. Like, we have other
Mm-hmm.
things that are working for us. I don't have to do that anymore. And I think kind of once he realized that he can kind of just let it loose and be free, like, and that Cooper Kupp wasn't the only guy that they had, I think that's could be possibly when things kind of change. But yeah, my only concern is with Cooper Kupp is, you're going to get 2-3 games injuries, and then you're going to get some good games. So I don't know about the ankle injuries, the leg injuries. Like that's the one thing that kind of puts me off on him. But if you can get him for a relatively good price, and I'm okay with it. But like you said, he is one of those more risky kind of buys because
He
of
is.
that age, that injury history, and those ankles.
Would you agree that and listen, not every season is going to be a carbon copy of the previous season, but there does look like there is a bit of a formula where, as you said, they could run the ball with Kyron Williams 23 times in a game. Puka Nakua can command 10, 11, 12, 13 targets that we've seen in games. So he doesn't have to shoulder. He's not going to get 190 targets anymore. That's not happening, right?
And then he's scoring tutties though too, right? If Stafford's
He
throwing
is.
tutties, I mean, he's got
He
5
is.
tutties. He didn't play all the games, so you're talking about even if he finishes with 1,100 yards, let's just say 1,100, 10 tutties,
There's value to
and
be
then you
had.
got Puka up there with the 1,300, 1,400. I mean, we'll see if that continues into next season. As long as Stafford is there slinging it, I don't see any reason why we should see anything different. So my next guy is on a team that most likely drafts a quarterback at the number
Ooh.
2 spot on the
Oh.
Washington Commanders, Terry McLaurin, Scary
Oh.
Terry.
Oh. That's nice. That's under the radar.
So yeah, I got Scary Terry as a buy for contenders where the QB situation should get better, where they should be drafting one of these young guys, and he's a veteran guy that this young quarterback can possibly lean on.
Mhm.
Right? Didn't have as great of a season as we wanted him to this year. I mean, wide receiver, 14 last year, finishes wide receiver 28 this year, does get over the 1,000 yards, but only 4 tutties. But Sam Howell just wasn't it, just wasn't getting the ball to his playmakers. Does that change? Is Bieniemy gone? Like, we don't know what exactly is going to be happening. So you could say it is a little bit risky, but he is relatively way cheaper than, any of the other guys. He's a guy a little bit more under the radar that you don't have to spend a ton for that can possibly give you upside not only this year but for the next few years. He is still relatively young. He's not as old as some of the other guys that we've talked about so far. I mean, 28 years
Mhm.
old, he'll be 29 going into next season. So Terry McLaurin, if I'm a contender, I want to go after him. I don't have to spend as much as I would on a Stephon Diggs. Yeah,
Oh,
wide
good
receiver
save.
34 at the moment. And when you look at guys in his range, I mean, Monty, B Rob, Christian Kirk, Jake Ferguson, Jalen Warren, Charbonnet, Stevenson. I mean, these are guys that are in the kind of range that Scary Terry's in. But yeah, Scary Terry, not a good season, so the value has dropped, especially now going into the offseason. He's a guy that's getting a little bit older. Another reason for his value to drop and for more people to not want him on their team.
There's some things I agree, and there's some things I'm not too sure about. I definitely agree with the value, right? And we talk about this all the time where it's connected to the value because Terry McLaurin is not going to be as expensive as any of the previous 3 guys we talked about: Diggs, Devontae Adams, or Cooper Cup. So the value could be there. The problem I have though is the previous 3 guys that we talked about can still give you wide receiver 1 numbers and really move the needle for you. Terry
Yeah,
McLaurin's
for
not
sure.
doing that. You
No,
know,
no, no, no. And I don't expect him to.
week 4 against Philadelphia, he was wide receiver 8, didn't have a touchdown. And then in week 15, he had the monster game. That's the needle moving game that I'm talking about, that he really only gave you one of those. And
Mhm.
that was 6 grabs on 12 targets for a buck 41 and a touchdown. Like the previous 3 guys we've talked about have had multiple games like that. And that's why I think Terry is a little bit of a step down, but also he's cheaper. So you can look at
For
both
sure.
sides of the coin. You can look at both sides of the coin from that perspective. I honestly have really liked Terry McLaurin for a long time. And I think we all remember when he first came in the league, he was making catches and we were like, how the hell did he make that catch? Like, he's a professional wide receiver that I think has just been in really such a bad situation. To further my point, like, remember when Terry McLaurin was set to be a free agent a couple of years ago? And we're like, yeah, Terry's going to be out of there.
Mhm.
He'll go to a good team, blah, blah, blah. I really would have liked to see Terry McLaurin play with a legitimate quarterback and reach that wide receiver 1 season that we thought was capable. His highest finish was last year, wide receiver 14. So he's never been a wide receiver 1. And I think
Nope.
some people, we tend to look at him as a potential wide receiver 1. So I think that's the
Mhm.
disappointment in Terry McLaurin. He's always hovering around the mid 20s. I think the
Mhm.
value's there. What value is that though? because he's a name, but the production doesn't. You know what I'm saying? So what are you giving up for Terry McLaurin?
I mean, he's not obviously as high value as the other guys, right? But you're not buying him to be that, right? We're just, we want some depth. We're a contending team. I want some guys that can put up some points, right? That can give me production for not necessarily a high cost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you need to spend a first for him at this point. I think,
No, I'm
an
not doing
early
that.
to mid second can get it done. I'd rather spend a mid second and a piece. I'm okay with spending that if I'm a contending team.
What are some of the other guys around his
Brian Robinson,
range,
Baker Mayfield, David
wide receiver wise?
Montgomery, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Jamison Williams, Christian Watson. Yeah, listen, I'm going out and buying Scary Terry, and I want him to be my wide receiver 3
Yep.
flex guy, maybe even on the bench if I'm really up there, if my squad is really that good. If he's
Mm-hmm.
just going to be my backup guy that I can plug in and play in there when I need to. So that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for him to be a wide receiver 1 or necessarily a wide receiver 2. He's one of those guys that we just want that upside for. We want the points on a contending team,
Any
right?
honorable mentions that you kind of had?
I do have 2 honorable mentions, and they're both quarterbacks for Superflex leagues, which is going to be Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins.
I thought we were talking
Both
about wide receivers, but okay.
well,
Oh, it
I'm
says
going
buys.
little bit of everything. We're gonna, just buys in general. We don't got no running back buys because we ain't buying running backs right now. So but yeah, I just wanted to throw in quarterbacks for, super flex leagues. If you're
Okay.
contending, you need that third quarterback maybe that's not gonna cost you a ton. Try and
Mm-hmm.
go after Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins, both guys that are, coming back from injury next year, just so you have that depth at that quarterback position. I'm not trying to rely on them really as my QB2, but, yeah, if you're a contending team, you should have at least 2 QBs already, so I'll take one of these guys to kinda take me over the edge. Maybe an injury happens, but I've got guys for bye weeks, I've got guys for injuries. I want one of those guys as QBs if I'm contending.
Maybe a couple of under the radar guys, and a guy that was kind of hot this year and a hot buy. Mike Evans is another one to take an
Yeah.
interesting look
Mhm.
at. I think he falls in that category with a Devonte Adams type. Like he still has those wide receiver 1 weeks in him. He does, man. And he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wide receiver 1 week. So when I say wide receiver 1 weeks, I mean 12 or better. He's had 6 of those bad boys. Still a touchdown machine, but the uncertainty with his future, he's kind of cooled off the last couple of weeks. There is some uncertainty with his future. It's another 30-year-old receiver that's a bit older, but can still be your wide receiver 2. I think Mike Evans still has wide receiver 2 in him with wide receiver 1 upside, as I alluded to with the 6 wide receiver 1 week finishes. So Mike Evans definitely belongs in that category as well. We talked about him during the season if you were
Yeah.
making a championship run. So I think you can include him here. And Russell Wilson.
Yeah. Same kinda
I
situation, I guess, as Aaron Rodgers and Kirk, a guy that doesn't have a job, under the radar kind of at the moment. Does he get a job? Does he not get a job? I think obviously he'll get a job probably somewhere, but a
oh
guy that
yeah,
you can get for
he
relatively
will.
cheap for sure if you're contending. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, so I think Russell Wilson, and listen, Russell Wilson didn't play terrible this season. Like he
Nope.
wasn't a disaster. Like he was really good, compared to the previous season. So I think Russell Wilson still holds some good value, and he could be one of those under the radar type of pickups for you if you need a QB 3 or even a QB 2 at this point. I think Russell Wilson, if Russell Wilson slots in your super flex, if you got Jalen Hurts or one of those top 5 guys, and Russell Wilson's your super flex quarterback, you don't feel terrible about it. Now it does depend on, like you said, does he get a job? I think he gets a job. I don't think there's 31 other quarterbacks better than him. 32.
Uh, the
Um,
crazy thing is that there doesn't have to be for him not to have
that's
a
fair.
job, like,
That's fair
that's another
because he's
thing
older.
another
That's fair.
part to think about, right?
That's fair. That's definitely fair.
But yeah, Russell as a guy that for contenders. Again, I don't really want him as my second QB. I want him as like my extra QB kind of that I'm holding. I don't want to have to rely on him because there is a situation where, like we see this year, he gets benched
If he
at the
doesn't
end
play
for
well,
whatever reason. We
yeah.
saw a few guys get benched. Another honorable mention I wanted to say before we got off was Travis Kelsey. A lot of
Mm,
people aren't really liking him right now.
okay.
He did still finish tight end too. Like, did he fall off from what he has been? Yeah, but he's still a top tight end. So if you're a contender and you don't have one of those top guys, I mean, go see what you can get Travis Kelce for.
But Kelsey's really interesting to get back to your point. And we had a little bit of a back and forth with some of our people when I talked about Travis Kelsey losing a step, and people automatically, wanted to burn me at the stake for saying Travis Kelsey lost a half a step. But if you look at it, he hasn't been the same in the back half of this season, and he was hurt week 1.
But
You
that's what
remember that?
he's been hurt kinda all season as well, so can we
And you
take that into account as part of it?
But are you telling me a 35-year-old tight end that's played as many games as he has is gonna all of a sudden be as healthy as he was
Well,
5 years ago? That's what I'm
no,
saying.
and of course, but if you're telling me I'm still gonna get a tight end 2 finish out of Travis Kelce, like, okay, give me that. Like,
But
am I
people are still
you're not
gonna
gonna get the Kelce that's scoring over 100 points over the tight end 2 anymore,
but
but
but I think just to kind of push back on you a little bit, Kelsey holds that name, that value in name, so people are still gonna wanna charge you plus for Kelsey. Like, as long as he plays with Patrick Mahomes, people are still gonna wanna
well,
charge you plus. So I don't know if the
sure.
value is necessarily there.
Well, I think that obviously, you're not gonna be able to get Kelsey from a contending team, right? Just doesn't make sense for them to move off of him. You're
But
gonna
if you're not
have
a
to
contender,
overpay,
yeah, I get
right?
that.
But
Okay.
if the only way you can get him would be if he's not on a contending team or maybe a middle of the pack team,
Yeah.
right? At that point, maybe you don't have to spend that much. I Will you spend the late first on Travis Kelce? Would you spend the 110 on Travis Kelce if you are a top team?
Probably, depending on what obviously what my other options are, but, if that's so tough, man, because,
No,
like,
forget
how much more am I getting out of Kelsey? Am I gonna get another
I'm
year
not
or 2?
offering a first, I'm offering a second and some kind of piece, maybe give a second and maybe my current
Okay.
tight end.
I could live with that, stomach that a little bit better than a first at this point.